for the second
No,
session?
it is not. There's a new one I posted on the Facebook page.
Someone has to pick up tweeting.
Okay,
I'm not tweeting anymore.
We'll start our second panel. I'll try to make the introduction like shorter than it was before. But Rashad Evans will be leading our second panel entitled Normative and Looking for Somewhere to Go. Rashad was born in Newark, New Jersey, where he graduated from Science High School. Rashad will go on to compete in college policy debate at the University of West Georgia, where he would become the first black debater to win a national championship at CEDA Nationals in 2001. He graduated from the University of West Georgia in 2003 and would go on to law school, where he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a JD in 2006. And of course, he would become an associate attorney at Sullivan and Cromwell. And he remained active, though, as in debate as a coach, eventually going on to help coach the first debate team ever to unite the crowns of the college debate world. In Florida State University's Ryan Walsh and Elijah Smith, he's around.
Right there.
Oh, he's right there? Oh, he's on the pen. Right there. There you go. Cool. My bad. But yeah, we'll just skip down. But he'll describe more of what the panel is discussing. But with that, I'll turn it over to Rashad Evans, who's also leading the discussion with Elijah Smith, Christopher Random, Amber Kelsey, and Jillian Marty.
Excellent. Well, the idea for this panel discussion was to kind of get at the question of debate and how to best address the questions pertaining to exclusion within debate. Black debaters have been raising exclusionary practices for quite some time now and talking about how judging practices as well as stylistic procedures involved in the activity have been exclusionary. I personally decided to take up that question by implementing an affirmative action policy in recognition that kind of what was going on and the calls being made by debaters were being largely ignored. And what I thought was the problem was that it was easy to ignore because it was kind of just a black problem. It was a problem that black judges faced and black debaters faced as it pertained to getting diverse judges in the back of the room. And in order to make it not a black problem and make it a community problem, that something more needed to be done other than just talking about the problem and making complaints. So in response, I decided to implement my own affirmative action policy in my judging philosophy, and I encouraged other judges in the community, namely Amber and Jillian, to adopt the same policy. It was supposed to be just an individual policy for us, something that a form of activism that judges could engage in order to force the community to deal with the fact that black judges weren't being allowed into the back of the room. Now, that policy was intended for us, but it was also picked up by CEDA eventually in some way when they decided to implement their own affirmative action policy, encouraging active placement of minority judges and women judges during judge placement. I think that raises an interesting question because our policy was never intended, or my policy, or the policy that I implement was never intended for CEDA. It was never intended to be a law for everyone or imposed upon everyone. And the idea that CEDA or the NDT or that there needs to be some bureaucratic institution within the community that makes all the decisions is part of the problem for me. And so even in response to that judging policy that I implemented and CEDA's new policy, the community itself has still been asking this large question towards black judges, coaches, and debaters: what should we do? Right? As they heed the calls, they want to know what to do. They don't seem to ask this question personally: what can I do? What kind of changes can I make? But instead, what can I advocate for? Who can I talk to, and what should I tell them to do? And that seems to ignore the question that, well, you're already doing a lot. You're part of the problem. And as part of the problem, you're definitely a part of the solution, which is to say that individuals have made this situation or created the situation that we're in within debate. And individuals can unmake the situation that we're in debate, that we're currently in debate. And that we shouldn't look to CEDA or the NDT or some other, in some instances, I guess, Title IX, I think they look for to regulate debate. Title IX is not the solution either. All of those places seem to be to looking in the wrong place, which is outside of oneself and one's role in the debate community. And I think that's part of the problem of debate, which is policy debate. The focus of policy debate tends to be on policy. What should the government do? And even though we think that we're engaged in policy making, we're not engaged in policy making because we're not asking how exactly can we do policy or how can we engage policy. So in that respect, the portable skills that we tend to talk about all the time is never really a portable skill because we can never actually implement it in our lives to solve problems that we are facing or that we are a part of. And so that's kind of the downside of debate. But it's also what I think is the important role that performance debate has in the activity and what certain debaters do, which is to make the practical question of how do we apply this theory into what it is that we're doing. For me, myself, I'm here at UC Irvine and I'm studying Afro-pessimism, and what I think about is how do I apply pessimism, or how do I perform pessimism or apply the theory in my everyday life. And part of that has become just a refusal. It's a refusal to engage in politics, a refusal to engage in trying to fix the community or trying to fix certain individuals within the community. And so it's to not answer the question of kind of what should we do, while simultaneously doing things, right? For me, the things that I like to do or that I have been doing, I like to think are in the direction of the destruction of debate, and to be willing to risk the destruction of debate in order to potentially, although I'm not promising such, save it, or maybe not save it, but it's a game of chicken, I think, between me and certain other, or the debate community of they're not willing to let us play, and therefore they're willing to risk the entire game for certain debaters within the community. And so we have to take that up and say, well, fine, if we can't play, no one can play, right? And so that's how I engage, which is to take the theory that I'm studying, pessimism, think about how it applies within this activity, and have that inform my coaching, my judging, and my politics. That is something I work with my debaters as well, which is how do you take the theory of what it is you're doing, what it is you're reading, whether it be Afro-pessimism or the instance of your current NDT and CEDA champions core theory. How do you take a theory that is seemingly academic and make it and turn it into argument and actually use it in a debate round? That's kind of where I'm at within debate and what I think that we should be doing. And my kind of first foray into that is kind of working with the Emporia team that included Ryan Wash and Elijah Smith, and trying to talk with them. How do you take your identity? How do you take everything that you do every day and make this an argument? Here's the cards, here's the article, here's the book. You're already doing it, just make the connection. Here's the theory behind your life, and let's debate about it. And I think that's proven to be an effective strategy, and I think that that's an approach for debate. And it is an answer to the question of what should we do? What should we do with debate? We're already reading about what we should do, how we should approach our lives, whether you're someone who is totally into, a Kapke or Deleuze or Nietzsche or, I don't know, a politics DA. In that, you kind of have an answer or an approach of what should we do? It's just a matter of downgrading that question to what should I do? How should I enact what it is that I believe, what it is that I'm reading, what it is that I'm studying? Yeah, that's kind of my spiel, and that would lead me to Elijah, because he's kind of my little the best embodiment of that theory of how to approach debate. It's how I approach coaching him, and I don't know how effective he thinks I am at it, but he's good at it.
The question that we were posed with for the panel was, I think or do we as a panel think, even though individually, that things like the affirmative action policies are necessary? I think that I necessarily understand those things in the context of, last year's, end of the season, the ability to see deep out rounds, and also to work with and talk with other individuals and coaches have been able to do those same things, because those things give you access. They let you see what happens at round robins, what happens at the social gatherings. Different people that may not have spoken to you before begin to speak to you, because every single ballot becomes just a little bit more, you become acceptable, but not in the context of your argument, but socially acceptable while you're winning. Because while you're winning, everybody wants to talk to you, but in the moment you lose or you're not winning anymore, you're not something that is really tradable, then you become not really important to those individuals at the same time. I think that yes, it is a question of policy, and I do think that the affirmative action policy is something that is good, something that has helped, but only in the context of understanding that policies will A, get rolled back, B, always be subject to future policies, and also have lax enforcement. So whether Wake Forest directly has people who at the award ceremony speak to the ways in which they have made mistakes in the past with single point inflation and affirmative action policies, whether the coast does these things, how they put judges in the back of the room, how at Texas, whether around rounds like octafinals and quarterfinals where there are multiple judges of color and women who are available, those people still weren't in debate rounds, still weren't judging people of color, still didn't really change the way that things operated. So we have to understand things in that context. So at least that's how I think so. There's three things I think really affect the way that affirmative action policies operate, because I don't think it's just about policy. I think if it's about policies, we've got plenty of policies. We've had policies. We've passed policies. It has to be about something more than that. I think what Rashad said about how if people made the problem, then potentially there's ability for us to fix the problem. I think the first thing is we need administrative flexibility. People who are coaches, directors for teams and programs can't just say, well, you do your prefs and do it for the sake of solely a ballot, because people like Amber, who I've actually spoken to, done like fantasy panels at the NDT, like if we debate each other in octaves or quarters, who are the acceptable black people? So you have come up, you made the list for a lot of people. Your training card, I guess, is coming soon.
Absolutely petty.
People like Amber, Rashad, even Shanira, people have indicated to me first rounds, but who do policy, they've said, yes, these people were great educators, yes, they voted for us, but yes, they were also, like, their decisions were pedagogically unsound. They felt like their decisions were fair. They felt like they made a lot of sense. Even when they lost, some of them said they felt like they made a lot of sense. So I think that it can't just be, by chance that these people ended up in the back of the room, or by chance the affirmative action policy gave one team out of 180 teams the chance to experience these judges as educators. But people who are administrators of teams, directors of programs, have to force their students to start moving people of color and women toward the front of their prep sheets. I think some people have talked about making press public, but I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. But for right now, even if it's rather than have Rashad at 100, if you move Rashad down to 75, right, at a tournament like Texas, where they go up to the 80th percentile, the very possibility of him coming into play, the possibility of you having to address people who are different from you is something I think is valuable. The second thing I think is student socialization. A lot of times you only talk to people or meet with people is during cross-examination, or during round robin gatherings, or like outside you're grabbing food and you toss somebody a hey, what's up, how you doing. Some people don't actually understand. Sometimes you want to know how they're doing. They tell you the record, because that's what we do. We're really mechanized, and there's a format, and sometimes your 2AC format gets you in trouble because you don't react. You don't think about the situation that you're in, and that's just kind of the way that when we get to tournaments, we turn that on, and you fail to turn it off. There should be spaces where you can actually meet and greet people, where you can say, oh, this is Nick Brady, this is Kyla. These are the people who aren't just a twerk team. They aren't just a car from Baltimore, but these are human beings with thoughts and emotions and things that you can take into account. So the next time that you think that maybe framework is the option or the only option, you then get to realize that maybe it's more than just an argument for some of these people, and maybe that's something that students are willing to take into account. But if you don't socialize them to see others as people, to recognize that they have feelings and thoughts, then those thoughts and feelings will never be recognized. The last thing I think is institutional access. Part of the reason that there's not a lot of people of color or women in out rounds or even judging is because those are the people who don't have access to institutions in the first place. People like Gabriel Murillo, who have recently offered to start making a list and keeping track of all the scholarships and places that are willing to give out full rides or even partial rides to students of color and urban debate league students. I think that those things are important, because until people can make it through 4 years or even 5 years of competing, until you get that, you won't have judges. If Kyla and Taylor don't feel like the activity is worth something to them, they're not going to come back and keep judging. If Corey and Amina feel like, after this year, it's just not sufficient. There's things that are irreparable about debate and things that don't make it valuable for women of color, they're not going to come back, which means that the investment that they have made, their coaches have made, that their families have made, goes to waste in the context of debate, because those are three, 4 role models that could have been there for other young people of color, and then those are people that you lose. I think that if all these things where people take into account the way that they're acting and the way that they act upon each other rather than just waiting for policies to change things, I think those things in conjunction with policies can really change the state of debate.
Thank you for that. I think it's really interesting that you raised the question of institutional access, which of course is an important one when you're talking about Black debaters. And I know this is something that the debaters at Towson and that Amber has dealt with, especially in trying to navigate that university and create opportunities for their debaters and be able to get them to tournaments. So I was hoping maybe, Amber, you would talk about kind of what it's like for you in dealing with the question of institutional access, but also what it was like for you with your affirmative action policy. Because I know that you implemented your policy as well. What kind of reactions did you have with it?
I'll tackle the affirmative action policy first. So, interesting, because you publicized your affirmative action policy. Rashad publicized his affirmative action policy, and I did not until Rashad did. But I had been considering an affirmative action policy for quite some time, actually, because of the fact that it was just the case that there was and is a real ghettoization of judges in debate, but also of Black thought in debate. And what I mean by that is that I wouldn't get the opportunity to judge a debate. I would go to a national tournament and would be in for all 8 rounds, which in a certain way was nice because I could hire myself out and never have to judge any rounds. But what it really meant was that I wouldn't judge rounds unless it was a so-called Black team hitting another Black team. And I think that, that as far as a community goes, if we consider this activity, this activity is housed in universities. And if we consider this activity to be, at least in a small sense, educational, then the idea that judges and debaters, that you can go for 4 years and not have a wide array of judging is obscene, right? And the idea that you can be an educator and that you don't come into contact with a huge portion of the community is obscene. And I think back to when I was a debater, and I didn't know the judges that were available to me, right? I would ask my coaching staff, what is this judge like? What is this judge like? And they don't all know, right? And so there's just really, segregation is real, right? It's real in the world and it's real in the debate activity. And I think that for me, like Rashad said, a large part of the affirmative action policy was, this is a problem for us, we're gonna make it a problem for you. This is the power that I have at my disposal. I certainly don't have the power apparently to make any decisions. I'm not considered to be rational enough or trained enough or intelligent enough to make these decisions. But speaker points are something that matter to people, and this is something that I can use, right, to make a statement, to make a problem apparent. But I think more than that, I think the stakes are really real. And the stakes are that we train students to think how we think about debate, right? So, you know, this can be everything, and I want to talk about this for a minute too. I'm going to broaden your question a little bit. To also talk about the importance of regional debate. But I think we train students to perceive debate the way that we perceive debate. And what we value, they will come to value. And so when we don't allow debaters, because it is an active choice, even if it's an active choice through ignorance or through inaction, to not come into contact with other people in the community, then they learn that certain people are not valuable and certain people are not rational, right? So when people make arguments like, what is decision making? And we presume that those things are not attached to bodies. They're very much attached to bodies in the very practices that we have in debate about who we think can be in the back of a room. And just to give an example from this year, this has happened to me increasingly often, which is disturbing, but one moment in particular, a coach at a very top squad came up to me, and I think that he was trying to be nice, which is funny in and of itself because I did not think that this was very nice at all. But I think he was trying to be nice in his mind, and he said, "Oh, our debaters love you," and I said, "I love them as well." And then he said, "They really want you to judge them, but we keep saying, oh, well, you know, that's just not what she's used to. She's not really able to judge those rounds." He said it with a totally straight face, just like, "Oh, you know, we think you're cool, but you know, you're just not qualified to judge these debates. Like, I was supposed to take this as some kind of compliment, but we think you're okay in general." And I more or less just walked away. But I think that it really speaks to the question of segregation. I think that what's at stake in this community is what it means to desegregate debate. So not to integrate debate, not to make minority debaters like white debaters, but to fundamentally transform debate such that it is not segregated. And we have to take that question seriously, because if we already knew the answer to that question, well, we would be at a promised land, and we're not there yet. I think that's something that we all have to think about and all put our minds to. And I think that gets at the question of policy. So when the question is, what policies do we institute? We have to give serious thought to what is the criterion by which we are considering diversity. Who counts as diversity? And these are not questions that I'm particularly invested in answering, but I can say that just having a wide open policy is not very good. I think that probably just based off what we've seen from this year, Wake Forest probably had the most effective policy, affirmative action policy. But what was unique about Wake Forest's affirmative action policy was that it was very specific. It was specific to Black people and women, right? And the future policies became just kind of diversity in general. There's no real standard, etc. And it just kind of became to my sense, this very premature celebration of we're doing something for the sake of doing something, which to me flies in the face of everything that I've been told policy debate is supposed to train you to be able to do, right? To really consider what the costs and what the effects are of the decisions that we make and the policies that we institute. And it really, I think, demonstrated, I think as Rashad also said, a real trained incapacity that we have in this activity about creating intentioned communities. This is a community that we have chosen to belong to. This is a community that we pitch to students. And perhaps, at least on this level, we have not given a lot of thought to what it means to intentionally create a desegregated environment, what that entails. I'm still not going to come back to Towson. Give me a minute. I want to say a few things that, because I'm all about your politics of refusal, all about it. But I want to say a few things that I think would be good starting points for developing some policies to desegregate debate. One thing that I think that we should absolutely do is, and I talked with Jonah Feldman about this, I think that there's serious trained incapacities also in terms of what arguments make sense to us. Arguments are more than just whatever we think the content or logical coherence of arguments are. And any good rhetorician will tell you as much. Arguments resonate, right? Thus the import of performance, right? It shows you how a lived experience of arguments. And also, we're just more familiar with certain things than we are with other things. There's a trained incapacity to what we see. And things like MPJ reinforce those trained incapacities rather than desegregate them. So I think that we need opportunities for, if you will, continuing education for judges, for coaching, right? The debate that I lived in is already not the debate that's happening now. And so the debate that older cats had is definitely not the same debate that's happening now. So we need ways to familiarize ourselves with the new evolutions of debate and with new thinking. And that has to happen on both sides. The other thing is that I think that we need to recognize that this is not, that there's an asymmetry. I think that this is still something that many a person in debate does not grapple with. There's a clear asymmetry in what is and is not an acceptable argument, which is just simply to say that what MPJ does is, regardless, the problem with a lot of these policies is that they don't grapple with the fact that most of the field is some level of hostile to performative strategies in debate, regardless of how you cut it, regardless of how you try to affirmative action. And I think that education, not just for debaters, is a good starting point. Also, hiring institutionally, we need more black hires, we need more consideration of debate not purely as sport, but as a pedagogical practice. You know, there's a real difference in a program that is housed in a department that has a tenure track position versus one that doesn't, right? The effects are clear. And I think regional travel, I think that it is important that we see each other face to face. I think these are opportunities for us to have moments for, you know, adult education, if you will, that, you know, primary focus on the NDT doesn't create. Towson? You want to talk about Towson?
No. Okay, so actually, I think I would like to take up your question that you just posed, which is how do we desegregate debate? What's really interesting to me is, as a lawyer, as we watch some of what's happening with these affirmative action policies, or the affirmative action policy that's been implemented.
Wait,
by.
please. I'm going to cut you off. Can I say one more thing?
Go for it.
Thank you. Other thing. All right. One more thing that I really do think should happen, and I would like for someone to tell me why this is not a good idea. I've not heard any good reasons thus far. I think that we should disclose the bottom 50% of our pref sheets, and there should be some kind of, we can talk about the mechanisms, we can talk about algorithms to create what criterion we want to use, but some way to assess whether or not you're pushing all of the people of color or all of the women to the bottom of your pref sheets, and some kind of enforcement mechanism to make that not happen. That was my other thing.
To stop it from happening? To stop that from happening?
Yeah. To discourage it. Absolutely.
Right. disclose bottom 50% of the prep sheet. I'm for it. The question I was going to ask is, how do we desegregate debate? Because this question was raised, I guess, partially by Brown versus the Board of Education, and what was the purpose of that and the aftermath. It seems that some tend to think that the demand or the goal was inclusion, right? When in reality, it was to seek to not be excluded, right? Desegregation. Don't deny us. Don't discriminate against us. Does not mean incorporate us into your world. Give us, your education. Give us, your life. So when Amber says we need to desegregate debate, I think that that's an important question and way of framing it vis-a-vis or versus how do we create a more inclusive environment. And I know that distinction is one that Chris Randall would talk about, the difference between desegregation and inclusion, and whether our goals in the debate community should be incorporation or to desegregation.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think the most difficult thing in being a part of a community is what happens when people commune with one another. I think communal spaces means that you then have to communicate with people who are not always or almost never having to communicate with you. And I think then that's where the conversations get interesting, because then people who are much like one another find out how much like one another they are. And then people who think that they're a whole lot like people find out how much unlike people you are. And so then it becomes those clashings of the intricacies of being human, right? And what it does it mean to be human, and who is human, and what is humanity, and all of those things, right? And so we see really tough conversations with people who we would think would be on the same side of the aisle, and especially the way whiteness positions certain people as likely to be on the same side of the aisle, right? Like, so you get Afro-pessimism having to come up against black feminism. You get Tommy Curry having to come up against queerness. You get these things happening. And so it becomes, how do we understand our communal relationships when people who are historically vulnerable all of a sudden come up and realize how privileged they really are in relationship to the communities they come from. Like, right, from Newark and Baltimore and the inner cities of Baltimore, there are things that we can talk about that people who grew up where we come from will never see. I've been able to, this is my third trip to California in as many weeks. I know people who lived and born and died and never got on airplanes. And so how is that complicated history related to the way in which debate operates? For me, I think especially in terms of desegregating debate, I think it has to desegregate its unwillingness to really to confront difference and privileges in a certain kind of way. I think for me, and I tell this story a lot to people, my first experience coaching debate was on the high school topic was the United States federal government to substantially increase its public health assistance to sub-Saharan Africa. For me, the reason why why I can spit that resolution out so quickly was that my first job, real stable job, was at Baltimore Talent Development in Baltimore, coaching inner city students in Baltimore. And these students witnessed probably the darkest moment in my life, which was the loss of my mother. And the related reality was that they watched me argue with insurance companies. They watched her lose her health insurance. They watched the slow degeneration of her reality to a hospice and then to her eventual death. And then the topic is now, let's take this same public health system that fails people of color and poor people in the country of America, and let's transport it to some more poor black people. And I think when people are talking about topical discussions and how we should relate to the topic, no one's really willing to come to grips with that, right? So when Wilson talks about the black body's been beckoning to death for junior partners and white people, but they just don't want to learn the steps, right? When Tommy Curry talks about eschatological dilemmas, when Sylvia Winter is talking about genre versus, all of those things and what's really a human, right? And we start analyzing it. A lot of people are so comfortable only understanding how they understand the world. And so because they're so comfortable only understanding the world, when they see difference, they just want to shatter it. Because otherwise I have to face that we're not all in the same path. We don't all understand things the same way. So I think that the way in which we need to be talking about desegregation has everything to do with us being able to interrogate our own wrestling with coming to grips with not being human or trying to understand what a human really is. Because otherwise I think we just end up having arguments with people who simply just want to keep the status quo the way it is because it benefits people.
Can I add something to that? And I think it doesn't start when the rounds happen. I think the tournament structure itself is very hostile. It happens in the hotels. Like, even the saying of hello to someone, like, I may not know you, but I know you because I know I've seen you before. Mm-hmm. And I've seen you at other tournaments, and I know you've seen me before. So we can have a glance and a little head nod and say, hey, or just a good morning, right? Could be a start. Like, it's really odd to me, and coming from growing up from inner city New York, I would get popped in the mouth if I went into an elevator in the morning and there were adults in the elevator and I did not say good morning to them. And it really freaks me out when at debate tournaments, I see you. I may not know your name. You see me, and we're seeing each other at lunch, and then the next morning we're in the same elevator, and it's just a straight face. And so I think we have to see each other, as Chris is saying, as humans. Saying hello to each other, saying a good morning could be a step in the right direction. So I wanted to add. It frustrates me. It bothers me.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like my point is that we all want to. The debate community reminds Black people and other minorities all the time just how not human you are. And I don't think the debate community really understands how much they supercharge those arguments for debaters and students when you take a child to a tournament and it's funny because people always I was talking to a coach of a pretty prestigious white high school. We were having a conversation. It's like, why are these arguments so popular? Well, these arguments so popular because I can take a child to a tournament, never tell them that the white people in the community don't like them, and then it's like, well, why is it people hate me? So then, what is my response to them? It's like, oh, we live with hope. Well, no, like I made a statement at a tournament that got me in a little bit of trouble. Where I started a tournament where we were excluded from, and I just typed in the words #I declare war, and I typed that, and it trended on Twitter, and it became this whole thing. And it was funny because, like, I told a student at a tournament, like, that was freaking out. I was just like, understand the people you mad at used to sell people and go to sleep. So if you think that they care about your feelings, understand they used to sell people and go to sleep. And they're like, well, yeah, and it's unwilling to come to grips with that history and all of those things. And that's why I think it's much more difficult for us to bring people into the fold and us to have conversations with one another because we don't want to wrestle with history. We don't want to talk about that stuff. We don't want to talk about slavery. We don't want to talk about the reparations. We don't want to talk about that. We're much more comfortable with the dominant narratives of race and gender and sexuality instead of the complicities and the complications that come with that.
Okay, so you're suggesting that part of the ways in which we can desegregate debate is to have more intense conversations that center around the question of human and make that contestable.
Yeah, and aggressive. We need intense, aggressive, non-politically correct conversations. Because as long as we're trying to all be nice to one another and act like it's all good, you have what they call fake politics where I'm from. That's not real life. A rich child from Greenwich, Connecticut. I think that we are prenatally designed to be mad at each other in debate. I do. I think that if you, I do. I think that if you are born if you come out in the inner city of Baltimore, you grow up there, and you come out in Greenwich, Connecticut, you come out and you face that reality, you are going to be diametrically opposed to one another when you have a conversation. Hey, how are you? I'm rich. How are you? I'm broke. Okay, well we got some things, and now you want to talk about a cap K? Okay, cool. You want to talk about capitalism while you reading off a MacBook? We got issues. right? But all the time we act like in debate that those things are not real. But that's why we argue. We argue because we are prenatally designed to be mad at one another. But we want to act like that there's somehow some comfortable common ground that doesn't actually exist.
Okay. Prenatally designed to disagree.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's birth on the pairing at Nick. That's where I disagree. I don't know if it came, in the womb. But as soon as I see you're on the other side of the pairing, I'm like, I hate you.
Yeah.
But maybe, it was there, deep inside, and innate. That's cool. Jillian, I know you feel very strongly about people not saying hi to you in the elevator and the things that go on before tournaments. Do you have other thoughts on
I have lots of thoughts.
on that?
I mean, the question of what we should do is a very broad and daunting question, and I think there are a number of things that we can attempt to do to desegregate or squash the rhetorical violence that is happening in debate, to how do we handle MPJ. And I think it's, starts off with just white people chilling out. Like, I mean, one of the things is, and I'm just being really honest, like,
They can't.
they what they see is they see people of color, black students coming in and talking all this blackly black, as Amina Ruffin would say, right? And they get scared, and and I think one of the things that would help is the acknowledgement that there is a genre of literature that these people need to start reading and need to start engaging. And I'm not meaning like engaging in a surface level, but actually go in depth into this literature to be able to have better debates, right? Like, for instance, not having debates if it's, I'm going to use Towson for an example. Towson being AF and team gets out a Vermont file and runs the Vermont file on the Towson team, right? I think that's a problem. So I think that one of the things we need to think about is how do we deal with the genre of theory and being able to debate that genre theory in a meaningful way. So people need to read. That's what Shanera says, right? Like, we need to read. And people are losing these debates because they don't read. The second thing I think might need to change is the way in which resolutions are couched. There's a lot of debate about the passive voice and all that other nonsense. I just think that, the way in which the voting topic process goes down is kind of messed up. I think the ways in which we think about topics is kind of messed up. I think the federal definition topic would have been an awesome topic to deal with, and we have the author here, right, Rashad. I think it was very good in writing a topic paper that I think could address all these issues that a lot of the debaters are talking about, but it became of, oh my God, I don't want to debate this black shit, so I'm not even going to vote for the topic, right? And then it becomes a thing of, when we even have a choice in resolutions that might include racial profiling, through the topic process, it gets diluted so that even though it wins the number one first place votes, at the end of the topic dilution, it now is the second, right? So now we no longer get to debate racial profiling. It happens to deal with, well, why are black debaters so upset about the resolution topic? Well, maybe sometimes because the resolution puts the actual positionality. Like, you have to debate the negation of your people through some of these resolutions. Like, I remember debating the development aid topic for Africa and being like, well, how do I tell Africans that development is what they're doing in Africa, their indigenous methods, is bad? How can I do that? I don't think I could do that. I mean, even the current world power topics, we have our first black president, and you want, people of color to go against the first black president, even if he's done some bad shit, right? Where Congress is really the issue. And so I think it starts off with the resolution. I think it's the way in which we construct knowledge. I think it's the way in which we emphasize national travel versus regional travel. I think regional debate is dying. And it's really, really sad. And a lot of the regional debaters, I think the debate is capitalistic and we can't be able to, some people may not be able to afford to go to a national tournament, but I don't think that we should devalue regional debate. And I think there's a method, there's a reach that is going into a devaluing of regional debate, especially in the round robin level, especially in the first round decision making. And I bet it's also going to be probably part of the second round decisions, right? And so I think that we as a community have to we have to change our values. Now the question of affirmative action, right? I mean, like, one of the reasons why I did affirmative action and I joined you and Amber in this was because I agree with Amber. We would go to national tournaments and we would just sit there. And that was cool for a tournament, but then it got boring, And you would go, I'd be like, why am I waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I don't have any damn rounds all day? And then it became an issue at the NDT when you had to have 12 rounds of judging. And so I would be with a national traveling squad and I would be in for all 8 rounds. And at the end of the year, I wouldn't have 12 rounds. And I noticed that it was a consistent thing for black self-identifying judges. And I thought that, well, shit, excuse my language, of course, right?
Now.
Thank you. Okay? Because I don't get no damn. Because politics of respectability, just like that, right? Okay? I felt like if I had to change my speaker points, and if that gave me a chance to at least get my 12, then that's what I was gonna do. And I saw I was judging more. And I want to thank Gary Lawson for doing that. And I want to shout him out. Because without him, I don't think a lot of us would have started judging again. And I want to agree with him and say what he said, that it's not an algorithm problem, it's a people problem. And we can't change debate without changing the people. And I think the people's minds.
You talking about white people?
I guess. I mean, yeah. Because even some of the other people of color, you may not know it, are putting some of us at the bottom of sheets.
Crazy.
Right? And so I think it's a people problem. And I don't know how to rectify that. But yeah, that's how I feel. So that's a lot.
I had a situation where I was coaching a kid in LD. The first time I ever heard about LD debate. And I saw 1950s kind of style racism. People were putting, somebody had called him a tar baby and wrote it on a piece of paper and stuck it in his bag, called him an affirmative action baby, talked about tarring and feathering, talking about lynching and hanging folks. The response to, the community even unwilling to even change the NDT photo for, Elijah and Ryan, right? And then should we so happen to lose at the NDT, I bet you if somebody white wins, that picture will be changed in 2.2 seconds. If that happens, we won't even, that picture will be changed so quick, that picture will be changed as the decision is coming out. They'll be like, at a 3-2 decision, somebody white, change, that picture will be done. The button is probably in the NDT final round right now. For if somebody white wins. The button is probably in there now. Just click, no. Right? Because the real reality, and what I was really trying to say with having more aggressive conversation, and I think more violence is probably needed in terms of the way we need to engage these conversations. Because really, what do you say to a community that would allow people to get on an internet group and call a child an affirmative action baby? What do we say about a community that would
put dog food
on
next to a Towson van in a district tournament? Okay. Right?
Yeah, dog, right. What are you talking about when you have coaches threatening teams are talking about slavery, so I'm going to put a knife on the table and a whip as my white team's performative answer to that? What do we, because really, as we're saying, and I agree with Jillian, that the consciousness of these people have to change, but we really need to examine what that consciousness is. Let's talk about what that is. And there is a real You know, that's why I was talking about that prenatal disposition, because there's something interesting going on about people who think that that's it. What kind of community do you exist in where you can comfortably exist after saying something like, I'm going to put a knife and a whip on the table in front of black people? When you don't feel like that's going to get you ostracized. You don't feel like that's going to get you in any trouble. You don't feel like people going to think that you on the margin, right? Somebody does something unprecedented in history, wins both national tournaments, that is not good enough to be at the opening year round robin. What do we say? What do we say when you have black people who are just all over the final round, the elimination rounds of the NDT, none of them get invited, right? Or the way you have a judge to tell Amina and Corey, who I don't think is not even an argument, that one of the best teams, at least in the last 20 years, you're not even worth judging. And this person, and then people will have his back on the internet. What are we saying? What kind of community do we live in, right? And that's not like talking about rehashing old things. We're talking about things that are weeks and months old, things that have just happened. So I think that it has to be some sort of more aggressive conversation than that.
People saying, I don't know what white supremacy is. I've never heard of that term.
What's the impact of racism? What is an Assata Shakur? Yo, we lost the debate on what is an Assata Shakur. After 2.5 hours of telling you what it is, in a world, you came up with, you all think I know more than I do. What is an Assata Shakur? Well, we done here, dog. We done here. Right? And that's real. And I think and until we can really get there, until we can really start to have real honest conversations, I don't think that this hope is really a thing. Because until we can really be like, you are the kind of community that supports people saying things to children like, you should be a dancing slave. You should be a table. I've had students be told that kind of stuff. I've had students say, as a white man, I've had judges tell my debaters that as a white man, I can't vote for you. Antagonism good.
Antagonism good. Okay, so then if I, as I listen to everything that's happened here, if I were to try to come up with a summary or a list, we need to have more regional travel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. White people need to change their minds. They need to behave better. We need to decolonize the mind. We need to have a better topic process, better topic proposal, or situation for assigning topics. And I have hiring. That's an important one. That's definitely one.
I want to add though, grad students. Being able to have black grad students. There are a lot of new and upcoming debaters who are seniors who do not have places to go to. And so we cannot teach black young seniors to be coaches without grad assistantships. So I'm sorry.
Sweet. Is there anything else anyone would like to add? Pref sheets. Disclosing bottom 50% of the pref sheets was one. We need to have more institutional access for debaters of color. Anything else we want to add? Because we're being told to wrap things up in here.
I would just add that you're right that it is, I think Gary was right, and you're right, Marie, stating that it is kind of a people problem. And I think it's terrible that there's this perception that a black critic in the back of the room will automatically presume to what arguments today have heard, where almost every experience, and actually every experience of the black critic in the back of the room has been one where I have learned something, and either in the debate that would make me a better debater or make me a better thinker in terms of approaching arguments. And I think people just need to start preffing black critics and really putting them much higher up, because they're really missing out on a lot of good advice about how to become a better debater and a better person.
Thank you.
Thank you. That will be a wrap. Appreciate it.